Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Let me remind people we're going to have the G20 finance ministers in Seoul, South Korea next week, and when the delegates arrive, they're going to find a copy of the main English language weekly magazine in the country featuring an interview by me, which talks about the need to ban hedge funds, ban credit default swaps and other derivatives, and also to do something with the Tobin tax, the securities transfer tax, all of that included. And it may not be precisely the current issue, but it'll be circulating. Right? They'll find it in the barber shops of Korea. This is in the April issue of Gwangju News, Gwangju News, page 20, interview with me talking about what has to be done to stop the Depression, turn it around, and start a world economic recovery. Now, concerning Geithner, Geithner says we have broad agreement on regulatory reform. Just to illustrate Geithner's duplicity, notice that concerning the Senate financial reform bill, it was Geithner who took the lead in blocking the McCain-Cantwell amendment, that is the one that wanted to reinstitute the Glass-Steagall criteria. In other words, Glass-Steagall, going back to 1933 in the original form, is that you can be a bank, a commercial bank, or an insurance company, or a stock brokerage, investment bank, stock jobbing, speculative operation. You can't be more than one. You've got to pick one. And that's a very important piece of New Deal legislation that was rolled back in the Graham-Leach-Bliley of 1999. Who torpedoed this? Geithner, working together with Rahm Emanuel. The other one is the Blanche-Lincoln amendment coming from the Senate Ag Committee, that banks are not allowed to have derivatives trading desks for derivative speculation. Geithner has declared war on that one. And this, again, New Deal. Under the New Deal, all derivatives pretty much were illegal from 1936 to 1982. And then even after that, it took almost 20 years to rehabilitate them to the point where they were confident it could stand up in court. The other thing about Geithner's demagogy is he says, you people in Europe shouldn't do the austerity that you're doing. Well, fine, they shouldn't do the austerity that they're doing. My recommendation to Europe is forget the austerity side, concentrate, at least initially, on smashing the speculators. Shut them down. No more credit default swaps of any kind. No hedge funds of any kind. Collateralized debt obligations, ban them. Impose a Tobin tax. Make it a substantial one. Make it a 1% Tobin tax, and keep that in country because you need the money to keep your education system going and to keep your budget from going out of control. Geithner does this by saying, oh, I've just been in China, and you should do more like what they do. Don't focus so much on exporting. Focus more on domestic consumption. Well, what does Geithner think domestic consumption means? I suppose he means expensive boutiques for rich people. That's his idea, right? More Chablis and Brie available nearby, I guess, would be Geithner. Of course, financial services, the big consumption item for him. The Chinese stimulus, remember, the $586 billion, I think it's 4 trillion yuan of about a year ago, a little bit more, in the spring of 2009. This was not based on simply expanding individual consumption or luxury consumption by certain parts of China. That does go on. But the main point of it was public works, public infrastructure, national infrastructure projects, railroads, right? The 30,000 miles or 50,000 kilometers of fast rail where the Chinese are already leading the world in that department. The 21 nuclear reactors that are now under construction in China, the great irrigation project they've got going, new airports, new low-cost housing, rural development, including water systems and rural electrification. That's what the Chinese stimulus went into preponderantly. Also, a lot of work with rebuilding shattered homes and public buildings in the Sichuan earthquake area. So all of that covered in the Chinese stimulus. And Geithner, with his unbelievable stupidity and superficiality, dares to go to Europe and say, you should be more like the Chinese, spend money on domestic consumption, don't worry about exports. This is it's absolute nonsense. I've done 2 commentaries about Geithner this week for Russia Today, and those will be up at tarpley.net by the time you hear this program. So the G20 finance ministers meet in Korea next week. Right? You've got basically 3 groups. You've got the Anglo-American U.S., U.K. derivatives bloc supported by the lapdog Sarkozy. You've got Germany, at least the focal point of a coalescing, I hope, bloc of anti-derivatives powers. And then you've got a sort of a middle group, which is Canada, South Korea, and a couple of others, people whose banks have not gone so heavily into derivatives, not so heavily invested in pyramid banking and speculation through the banking system. They're in a special position. So there we go with this. Now, in terms of the other European events, this afternoon, repeating, Fitch downgrades Spain to the point where that is crashing some European bank stocks, and U.S. markets still down, 100 points on the Dow. But what happened in Spain was the previous weekend. Spain was a country that should have joined the German ban when they could, back there on the Tuesday that the German ban was issued, but they didn't, and therefore by the following weekend they had Caja Sur, one of the 50 or so savings banks in Spain, bankrupt, blown away. It's about 1% of the banking system. Followed then on the Monday by 4 more banks, followed on the Tuesday by 4 more banks on top of that. So 9 banks in 3 days. This is the beginning of a banking panic in Spain, and you can see that will now roll along because of what Fitch has done this afternoon. Isn't it funny, as was pointed out this week, Zapatero is supposed to be a socialist in Spain, and Zapatero is much more timid. He won't do anything against the speculators, the derivatives, and the hedge funds. The German Christian Democrats with Merkel and Schäuble, with even the liberals, the pro-business, pro-finance party in Germany, the FDP, they're doing more against the speculators than the so-called Spanish socialists or the Greek socialists, the PASOK of Papandreou, or the Portuguese under this character, Socrates. All of those countries, they're just focusing on deadly austerity. Notice the insanity. Greece has 18% unemployment. You bring in the International Monetary Fund, what do they recommend? An austerity program, deflation, cut wages, more firings, bust the union, loot the state sector, privatize, destroy the economy, and they have 18% unemployment to begin with. Spain is even worse, 20% unemployment. IMF comes in, or the European Commission comes in. What do they demand? More austerity, cut public wages, cut public jobs, fire state workers, and all the rest of it. This is absolute insanity. Didn't you learn anything from the escapades of Herbert Hoover back in the 1930s? The attempt to balance the depression balance the budget in the depression does not work. It fails. The more you cut the budget this year, the bigger your deficit will be for the next year, because your employment levels go down, your production levels go down, your tax receipts go down, and your deficit goes up. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.